Let's talk about the issue. Why does anyone in their right mind think that they need to put on more than 1 to 2 sprays of fragrance? Now, you could be making a huge mistake overspraying your fragrance, because the reality is some ingredients, some notes, they disappear really fast while other ones can last all day. So why do some fragrances fade fast and other ones last forever? Well, most people think it's the percentage of fragrance oil in the bottle. However, that's only part of the story. You see, you also have to understand what the ingredients are. Now, for the first time in 30 years, I'm going to put my organic chemistry to good use. So with a lot of fragrance top notes out there, we're talking about the notes found in citruses, aquatics, and fresh fragrances. Well, these small, lightweight molecular structures like linalool and citronal, they've got a low molecular weight, which basically means they are going to disperse into the air rather quickly. Now, some of you guys that love beast mode fragrances are like, why do people even use them? Well, one, a lot of these notes smell really good. And two, not every fragrance has to last forever, despite what the internet may tell you. Now, heavier molecules, as you can guess, are going to last longer. An example would be ISO-E Super. And it has a branched molecular structure and overall stronger intermolecular forces that give it a bit more stick, slows down the release, and hence it lasts longer. And we're going to see this in almost all base notes. Now, can the right base notes help top notes last longer? The answer, you bet they can. In fact, that's why perfumers love certain combinations, because the right base notes can slow down the evaporation process by binding lighter molecules with some of the heavier ones. Now, the trade-off here is it does alter the fragrance composition. Example, if you add a bit of oud to a fresh citrus scent, it may help retain the citrus for longer, but it's not going to smell like a fresh citrus anymore. It becomes a bit dirtier, a bit heavier, which some people like, other people not so much. Now, a higher concentrated fragrance, more fragrance oil, does that always mean more projection? The answer is no. Now, when you do have more oil, in general, that's a stickier fragrance that's going to stay on the skin longer, but isn't necessarily going to release as quick. Less alcohol often equals less evaporation and sometimes less projection. And we see this in the house of Dior, Sauvage in particular. If you look at the parfum, yes, has more oil in it, but you're going to find the EDT, that one screams, that one projects a lot more. And what about the saying, more fragrance oil equals a better fragrance? Guys, that is a myth. Not only can too much fragrance oil sometimes clog up the atomizer, but a lot of brands, knowing that people are looking for this, they can actually manipulate the numbers, and they can add cheap solvents or ingredients like hedione, which in some cases can enhance a fragrance, other times it's just there as a filler. Next up, let's talk about the capabilities of your nose. The reality is, when it comes to most notes that we're used to, if they're good ingredients at a 15% fragrance oil, that is going to be more than enough, and a healthy nose should be able to detect them all and smell everything. However, once we start to go past 20%, for a lot of people, this can start to become too strong. You see, all noses cap out at a detection limit. Now, if you're a trained perfumer, you can actually expand the range of your nose. But for the average consumer going for a niche fragrance that claims to be at 30% fragrance oil, you aren't necessarily going to smell the ingredients any better. You're just going to probably get more longevity. Next up, let's talk about skin versus clothes. So the big advantage of putting fragrance on your skin is going to be heat. Your warmth of the skin is going to transfer energy to the fragrance molecules that in general is going to make them evaporate in the order that they were meant to by the perfumer. Fragrance on clothing, on the other hand, doesn't have the same energy exchange. And although some people like this because it can last longer, in some cases it could take a complex fragrance that would have a top, middle, and base and actually make it smell just linear. And that's where the fragrance smells pretty much the same throughout its life cycle. Me personally, I apply on both, and when applying to the body, I pay attention to pulse points. These are usually going to be some of the warmest parts of your body, so they can help your fragrance project throughout the day. For me, in general, I find that 1 to 3 sprays, that is the most I'm putting on. And again, this is in the chest area. I'm putting clothing over it. Also in the hair. I know some people are concerned about it drying out the hair. I feel this is relatively small, and the hair just does a great job of holding the smell. You don't want to do the mist cloud, because more than half of that stuff does not end up on you. Instead, it ends up on the floor, and it's just a big waste. Now, being a bit more specific, let's talk about distance from the skin when you spray. On average, 3 to 6 inches, but this depends on the atomizer. You're going to find on higher end bottles, companies like Dior, they have amazing atomizers. You could be 6 inches away and this thing is still going to spray evenly on the body. Cheaper atomizers, you'll find sometimes you got to be closer to 3 inches because they spray really wide and they are inconsistent. But the more complex fragrances, the ones that you expect to pay a little bit more money for, are going to be the ones that are orchestrated and meant to be smelled in a particular way. And that's why you don't want to rub fragrances together, because the idea here is that it can affect the way that those certain notes are released. It's a very small thing, but I know some people say they can smell the difference. My point here is understand your fragrances. Some of them you can go really light on and they will project just fine. Other ones you may want to spray a bit more, but if you confuse that, all of a sudden you can choke people out. But do you understand the basics of men's fragrance? Seriously, not only is the language of fragrance foreign to most men, but it's also mixed with words from other languages, such as French, Italian, Spanish. Now, to make this really easy for you, I'm going to go over some of the basic terms I think every guy should know. First up, let's go over fragrance concentrations. Now, the least concentrated, as you can see here, is eau fraiche. After that, eau de cologne. Next up, eau de toilette. After that, eau de parfum, and then parfum. Now, understand these percentages of the fragrance oil are general guidelines. The same holds true for how long the fragrance is going to stick around. The reality is there are no regulations when it comes to this wording. Now, what about alcohol? So alcohol is the most common diffuser, basically the distributing agent of fragrances that we see in the world. Now, there are other diffusers when it comes to fragrances. I've seen water diffusers. This requires an expensive process. It isn't very common, and these fragrances I have heard can spoil quicker. And there's also fragrance oils, fragrance balms in their solid format. So if for some reason you don't want to use any alcohol, know that you do have options out there. Now, longevity is as it sounds. It's how long the fragrance sticks around. Projection is how far after you apply does the fragrance push itself in a room. And sillage is basically how does the fragrance stick around? If you're going to walk by somebody, does it actually leave a fragrance trail? Now, I use the word note. Understand that this is an individual ingredient. It can sometimes be something you're very familiar with, like vanilla, or it can be something maybe you've never heard of, but you definitely smelled, like cologne. Now, you're often going to see this chart, which talks about top notes, middle notes, base notes. Now, in general, the top notes can be the first one you smell, the heart note, the middle one is second, and the base note is usually the last thing you pick up on a non-linear fragrance. Now, accords are a little bit more complex. These are the combinations of notes to get certain smells. So if something has a citrus accord, that could be a combination of the notes bergamot, grapefruit, Italian lemon. Now, when it comes to seasons and fragrances, I'm not going to say that you have to stick with the general rules, but what we see are lighter citrus, woods. These type of fragrances are great for summer versus cooler weather. That's when we're going to see the gourmands. That's when we're going to see the orientals. That's when we're going to see those heavier fragrances. So flankers are going to be where they take an original fragrance that sold really well, and they're going to create variations, changing a few notes, or maybe changing the concentration. And if you take off the lid, you're going to immediately notice that right here we've got an atomizer. This is very common on perfumes, on colognes, on fragrances. While on aftershaves, whenever you take that lid off, what you're going to see here is it's open. It's made for splash application. Now, gents, if you're looking to buy fragrances online, you want to make sure you get the real deal. If you're looking for niche, hard to find fragrances, then you want to get over to Max Aroma. Fragrances like M. Micallef. I've talked about the original Desire Toxic. This is the new Desire Toxic Intense. It's an aromatic, warm, spicy, green citrus fragrance that's very unique. As some of you guys know, I don't normally like a cannabis note. This thing is blended beautifully. And gents, I'm telling you, if you're looking for some of the best fragrances on the planet coming out of the Middle East, check out the Spirit of Dubai. Right here, as you can see, I've got Bosquir, an amazing fragrance, a little bit complex, or maybe you want something slightly different. Check out Abjar Bois. Absolutely beautiful packaging, absolutely beautiful bottle. And what I love about the Spirit of Dubai, these guys know how to blend notes. And on a personal note, the fragrance I'm wearing today, check out the house of Ojar, specifically Wood Whisperer. This is a woody powder amber fragrance with a really clean, woody, powdery smell that gets compliments. And besides Wood Whisperer, if I were to recommend any fragrance for a blind buy, check out M. Micallef's Red Colorado. You got the pines with the woods. It's a very simple yet complex, absolutely beautiful fragrance. And the best thing about Max Aroma is you can get samples before you buy a full-on bottle. Down in the description of today's video, I'm linking over to Max Aroma with the best deals you're going to find on the web. If you want your expensive fragrance to last longer, to project more, then the first thing you want to do is apply a moisturizer. This should be a neutral moisturizer, an unscented cream. You can use Vaseline as well. Point being is you want to seal up the skin where you're going to apply the fragrance. Now, that first tip was all about taking care of your skin, but don't forget, you can do this within your body as well by drinking more water. It sounds so simple, guys, but this right here can help your fragrance last longer. Now, this next tip is a bit more advanced, and that is to layer with Iso E Super or Ambroxan. And right here, I've got eccentric molecules, number 1 and number 2, which is Iso E Super and Ambroxan. What happens here? Basically, these don't really have much of a smell. They will mix with your fragrance, and they will help it project and in some cases help it last longer. Now, what about reapplying fragrances? Having a 200 ml bottle of a fragrance is not something it's easy to carry around, especially if you're traveling, going through airport security. I love travel atomizers. Yeah, this right here really solves the problem. They're so easy to use. As you can see, they've got a male, a female, and you simply put it together. You make love, you make it happen, and boom, you've got something that can travel and you can spray throughout the day. I like applying to the skin, but one of the issues is it heats up and it excites the molecules. They leave the skin, they project more, they just don't last as long. With clothing, you have to be careful because if you apply it, and I would spot apply it because it could stain. Sometimes they put coloring in the fragrances. Other times the alcohol can react to a dark colored shirt. So I would say applying the fragrance 4 to 6 inches from the clothing, you should be fine. Don't put a whole lot on the clothing, but this will help it last longer because it's in general cooler and it's just going to be able to keep the oil right there on the clothing. So you're going to get whiffs of it throughout the day. Fragrances, if unopened, last a long time. But once you start to go through it and more air starts to build up in the bottle, it's that replacement of alcohol with air that causes the fragrance to start to break down. In addition, if you don't store the fragrance properly, you put it in a heat area, you expose it to light consistently. Yeah, all this can cause a fragrance to go bad prematurely, although that rarely happens. But if you want your fragrance to last a long time, keep it stored in a cool, dark area at a consistent temperature, and don't open it unless you're going to use it. Many of you guys have asked me specifically, when I'm wearing deodorant, does this affect the way my fragrance smells? The short answer here is don't worry about it. Most grooming products don't have enough fragrance oil in them to last more than like 30 minutes when it comes to smell. Now, what about aftershaves and fragrances? Can you mix these two? So an aftershave, historically, this was actually had a medical purpose. Go back 200 years ago when men were shaving, if you had a really deep nick, this could be something serious. So you wanted to take care of it with alcohol. You're going to find that most aftershaves contain well over 95% alcohol and only a small percentage of fragrance oil, sometimes 1 to 2%. Fragrances, on the other hand, contain usually a much higher percentage of fragrance oil, 10, 20, sometimes even 30%. So because they've got more of that fragrance oil and it's made in a way that it's going to last longer. The fragrance in general is for the application of the smell. It's not for disinfecting anything, although it can be used in certain circumstances for that. But really, this is about spraying it on your clothes, spraying it on your body. So throughout the day, you're projecting a certain scent. Now, what about bad fragrances? Fragrances that just don't smell right. So I'm thinking this rarely happens, that actually a fragrance maybe is really old. It was left in a warehouse where the temperatures went from extremely hot to extremely cold. It was maybe left in the sun and it's not what it used to be. But I think a lot of times people just didn't test the fragrance. They don't even know what they should be smelling for. Now, some people just really do not like cilantro. It tastes horrible to them. I love cilantro. And I think it's almost something similar to that. So when you see a lot of people saying it was a bad batch, be careful of that. Yes, and I know there are reformulations. You see this especially with higher end fragrances. Everyone's talking about batch numbers. Now, a lot of times the reformulations happen because let's just take oak moss. This was something that was shown to cause irritation in some people. So across the board, they pretty much eliminated oak moss. And so these things do change over time. When you walk into a store and they give you that little strip to be able to smell it on a piece of paper, that is the worst way to smell a fragrance. All right, I take that back. There are probably worse ways to do it, but that really doesn't tell you anything. You see, skin and paper, two very different things. First up, your skin has a bit of a chemistry to it. Not only does it have a pH balance, but it also is going to have a little bit of oil, a little bit of sweat. It's going to have residue on it. It has its own unique scent. So it's safe to say even the most common fragrances out there, when worn by different men, by different people, they can sometimes give off a different scent because they're being mixed with a different base. A super secret ninja tip right here is to actually record a video, not only of the fragrance you're testing, especially if you're testing more than one, but actually your first reaction to the smell and to record that information so you have it for later. We like to think we can remember everything. Yeah, good luck with that. All right, gents, after all of that, now let's get into the nitty-gritty of actually buying the fragrances and how to do it. Now, specifically, where to buy. So if you buy it in a store, there's a lot of great options. Instant satisfaction, you grab the fragrance, and you leave. And most of them have really tight supply chains, so you're not going to be dealing with counterfeits or something that's fake, especially if it's wrapped in plastic. And again, it comes from a reputable person. You can actually take it back if you suspect it's counterfeit. Now, not everyone's going to have a return policy. Now, the problem with buying in person, as many of you guys know, is you're not going to get the best deal. The best deals are online, but understand if it looks too good to be true, it probably is. You're over on Wish and you see a fragrance that normally goes for $200 and it's going for 20. Understand that is probably it's a counterfeit. They're going to steal your money. Even eBay, you really need to make sure. Now, I know tons of people have great luck on eBay, but you need to research the seller. Make sure that they are a legitimate seller. They've got real reviews, not bot reviews. Now let's talk about clones. So a lot of you guys recognize this clone right here. It's a clone of Creed Aventus, Club de Nuit Intense. I think clones are perfectly fine. They serve a purpose. That being said, don't fall into the trap of thinking that a clone is the real thing. If you're going to go with a clone, I would advise, hey, getting a sample of the original and smelling the original and occasionally wearing the original on an important date. And then every day, yeah, wear the clone because you can't afford to be wearing that maybe expensive stuff all the time, but you understand the difference. And to me, then you get the benefit of both. All right, gentlemen, so what video to watch next? How about my 10 out of 10 picks? These fragrances are absolute masterpieces. Wondering what I'm talking about? Check it out. I cover quite a few fragrances that, yes, are just, yeah, as you can tell, I love fragrances. So if you like these type of videos, keep watching. Boom. Don't stop. Keep going. Oh, yeah. Boom. It's a good video.